Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the stage as we begin a conversation on Indigenous-led conservation.
Excellencies, Honorables, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Noah Idaong, and I'm honored and humbled to deliver a message from the Chairman of Palau Council of Chiefs, Paramount Chief Raklay Rafael Bawong Irmang, ruler of Palau's northeast hemisphere. Here it goes. On behalf of myself, Paramount Chief Ibdul, all men and women leaders of Palau, I want to end my welcome to all of you to Palau. My message is intended for the panelists here and also for communities and indigenous peoples of Palau, wider Micronesia, and the Pacific. I regret I'm not here to support you in person, but I will be watching through the media and will be with you in spirit. I want to thank you, the panelists, for sharing your experiences and important work you and your communities are doing in your own respective places. Amplifying voices from communities will help guide and direct urgent and collective actions where they are most needed. I want to remind us of our cultural responsibilities and obligations to care for our islands, our peoples, and the critical need to balance our environment and in harmony with all of everything we do. Traditional leaders have played important roles throughout history, keeping our island resources bountiful through colonial times, through natural disasters, and even provided calming effects during unrest and government instabilities. Our roles must not be cast aside. I want to remind us as resource owners that we must continue to take ownership of issues and to seek the best options to solve them. After all, it is our islands and people who will ultimately benefit or pay the cost for our carelessness. Reality is issues are now coming from all directions, different sources, and have become so complex that our communities and systems can no longer keep up. Therefore, we do need help in science, technology, including innovative ways, and even funding to support and augment our systems. But let's be clear to communicate our values and aspirations and seek partnership built on mutual trust and respect and common agenda. Let's continue to work hard to solve local issues, to give meaning to our leaders' voices in international fora. I wish you luck. I give blessings to you all, and I look forward to successful outcomes of your panel and the conference itself. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a young lady. Her name is Moiwai. She will be giving a chant, and the chant is about unity, and it's about cooperation, and it's about being together as we sail abroad. She will bring down the assaults or the chant are sacred in Palau, and so she will bring it down. And when she does, let's all help her to bring it down. And then when she does a chant, let's help her. At certain intervals, we have to say Hui to emphasize the message that is being given. I ask all the Palauans here to help that so that we can all participate in that message and assaults. Thank you very much.
Ako langit, masel bakot tangli asols, eka mauhuay, almoklo. Makmaong. Oh, the swaklo. Oh, the sukle laang. Awa the malasoyang. Ale rubkaledeng makngit. Ya the talbakale. Engungil and the koliyang. Emalak the kole. Takmo adal bork the som. Malosser iya the som. Bailak the kole. Edoigal ngu aroy diyang.
Makua a me nā kupuna. Aloha mai kākou. O Aulani Wilhelm ko uinoa, mai ka aina o Hawaii Nui a Kea, a hiki mai I ke aina o Belau. Velina. Your Excellencies, ocean colleagues, really with greetings first to our collective and our respective ancestors from our various cultures and places. Ali. Welcome to this session on Indigenous-led conservation. I'm Aulani Wilhelm, and I bring to you aloha from my islands of Hawaii, first to the ancestors and the host peoples of Palau, and to all of you. Thank you so much to Moiwe for that beautiful incantation, and to you, Noah, for asking the cultural leaders to help open this session. As you can see, we've designed this session to just be a little bit different. While we are on this stage, we're here sitting together and really asking all of you to sit with us in a way that we more commonly in the Pacific Islands sit down in a circle together, face to face, when talking about matters of significant consequence. So please consider yourself as part of this metaphoric circle, so we can all be here face to face. And thank you for the people of Belau for asking us to join, for waiting for this meeting to come into and be together. It is so important to do this. We wanted to, again, create this space so that we really can have this discussion, because each of us here on this panel are fortunate to have been raised in place and in tradition. We are all indigenous peoples who have learned and grew up raised in kinship with nature, but not without significant challenges, right, for the tremendous multi-generational hardship and change that our peoples have all endured. We're here really to share some of these important stories, and most importantly, the insight of kind of the what, how, and why of Indigenous-led conservation. So little of our global ocean, as we've heard throughout the day, is protected, but much of it that has been protected has come from island leaders and communities, from places barely discernible from space, right? To protect and responsibly care for people by protecting and responsibly caring for our places, for our land and our sea that feeds us, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, and in every other way. As Indigenous people, we descend from cultures deeply rooted in the natural world. That real familial intimacy, right, that we understand really enables us to be in tune with the micro changes and make decisions, short, medium, long-term, and multi-generational, so that those decisions can be grounded in the understandings of the natural world and bring that knowledge, and not just the knowledge of what, but how we thought about problem solving to the problems that are persisting today. Really, if you think about it, right, the information and summative, historical, ecological, and cultural information that are contained within our languages, within our practices, our values, our place names, our stories, our chants that you just witnessed, really, they are still relevant today. And how do we know? Well, it was already acknowledged today. It's evidenced by the fact that the best of what's left on the planet, simply put, is in the hands of Indigenous peoples and local communities, those who still remain closest to nature. In fact, it's estimated that Indigenous peoples and those who continue to live close to the land manage or have tenure rights over a quarter of the land base on Earth, right, that contain 40% of ecologically intact landscapes and protected areas, and a remarkable 80% of the remaining biodiversity. It's pretty good statistics, and some estimate that as even higher. A similar calculation has not yet been done for the ocean. It's a bit more complicated, right? Not quite as straightforward, but clearly, protection of oceans has been and continues to be led strongly by Indigenous and local communities, utilizing, where possible, Indigenous traditional management approaches alongside understandings generated through conventional science. You've heard from some of these leaders already today. It's been wonderful to hear how much we've already spoken about Indigenous knowledge and the importance of this, and that you've already heard from some of these Indigenous leaders. There are many more if you look around in this audience, and clearly in this circle with us here on stage. I've already introduced myself, and I'd like to ask each of everyone else on the stage to introduce themselves in a way that is aligned with their own traditions, who they are. If you'd like to know more about what they do, you can look at our bios on the website. I'm standing. Whatever.
Ali, Joe Suba, selamat sore. Aniki me yagamo, itoki laut mana wegaine. Itoki danago enaka duaine. Koya keitai ikan ma karang ma laut ma manako enak keitai ne. Mama bapa yokaido ikidima koya keitai. Itoko danago koyao. My name is Selfie Tabay. I come from Indonesia. So my family name is Tabay. So I'm native people from the highland of the Papua, West Papua, and then I'm working with the community in Papua and West Papua. So it is an interesting time to introduce myself and introduce my customary tradition in West Papua. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora na tātou katoto he te rā mane. Ko Anthony Vavea tōku ingoa, no Mitiaromaiau, te tai inua mākeke I roto I te kuke airani. Ali, everybody, my name is Anthony Vavea, and I come from a small island called Mitiaro in the Cook Islands. Kia ora na.
Kia ora na.
Misa tiksakana turanga na marama bali ni vono sako Palau. Tiksakana turanga na ililu ni matentu. Tiksakana turanga na matamay na matentu leo Amerika. Tiksakana turanga na marama na ililu ni matentu. Inda songo ni watsakatigo na sinikua. I tiko talanga na liu ke na mata, mana ve songo ve kani, and ngaravavata tiko na vaka ni ke na maruroi na nonda waitui. Au wawina kasakani mai tu na matamuni na kavindendai, bundo sakakina na nongita vilelai. Excellencies, ocean colleagues, my name is Susana Wanganambete Tuisese. I am from a clan called Nakorowaiwai from the island of Moala in the province of Laos in Fiji. My totem fish is called a matu. It's a small fish that you can easily find inshore. It's also commonly known as the spine majora of the species Gracies. And my traditional role that I play in my community is to advise and protect the people on the island of Moala. I come from a long line of warriors. We are known as the Mbatileka. And one of the other roles that we commonly play is to provide advice to the chief of the island, the Tui Moala and the Turanga and the Tui Nassau. I am very fortunate to be part of an organization that cares about traditional and indigenous people. And in my role, I have been fortunate to be able to extend that advisory role not only to my people, but also to other provinces within Fiji and hopefully to the whole region of the Pacific. Menakavakaleo.
Ali Hafaday Tiro, Kasalalia Menko. My name is Representative Sheila Jack Babalta. I am the daughter of Diego Regis Babalta and Dolorina Wilbacker Jack Babalta. I was born and raised on an island called Saipan in the Mariana Islands, located right next to our world's deepest point in the ocean, the Marianas Trench. I am passionate about representation, having a seat and a vote at the table. I love working with our youth, having them engaged in ocean conservation and climate solutions. They bring so much joy and energy to this work. President Obama once told me that raising awareness, gathering allies, and unifying voices are important steps when facing complex, large issues and institutions that are larger than us. And so I am here today to raise awareness, gather allies, and listen to the voices. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel. Thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Noah Idong. I'm a trained hunter and fisherman, and I'm pretending to think I know what I'm doing, but thank you.
Clearly, we're not in a traditional circle, and even if we were, we would come from so many traditions that we would all get confused on who's supposed to talk next. So I'm just going to assist a little bit in this process, but just again, join with us and imagine. I'm going to try to, develop a conversation here in the time that we have remaining. So I want to start with you, Tebai, Selvi, Tebai, to, how do you involve? Just, a lot of people ask us, how do you work with indigenous communities? How do you involve them in decision making? So can you just share with us kind of how you do that and give us some examples or highlight some solutions of how that's been done in West Papua?
Yeah. In the West Papua, we have a community, local community. There are three parties, namely representative from the customary society, and then second is a representative from the religion, is like a leader of the church, and then the third is a representative for the government, local government, and then it's especially for the conservation, marine conservation, where it is a process to establish the three parties must have a responsibility, high responsibility, in the starting from when they're planning to make the MPA program until the established program. It must be approved by the local community, by the community in Papua. So they can give the advice for the program, for the conservation process, when it's about the core zone or is because we have a traditional knowledge, because you have a traditional customary practices in the area. So when they establish this core zone or no-take zone, is like no-take zone, it must be approved by the local community. I think it's one involving the community people from the West Papua. And then second is community local in Papua advise to what activity can do and what activity cannot do in conservation area. And now we have one mechanism of supporting mechanism to continue finance, sustainable finance in West Papua, and then have a person from representative for local Papua is like academic, from the academic, and then from the government can position in the board. So there are deciding maker from the program and then from the money to support the conservation. Yeah, I think so.
So it sounds like really making sure that there's representation from across and clarity on how decisions are made, with a lot of socialization and engagement along the way. So I'm just curious, Susanna, there have been field exchanges, right, between West Papua and your islands in the Lao Islands in Fiji, and I think it was prior to COVID, right? But what struck you, maybe in what Selvi was saying, that's similar or maybe different from your islands?
Indeed, there are a lot of similarities and there are also a lot of differences. But I think of important to note is the fact that we have a lot of natural resources. There's an abundance of natural resources in West Papua, as in my country, in my province where I come from. The challenges that we were at the time that we had the exchange was that we were beginning to talk to the chiefs to ask them to consider putting aside the whole province as a managed, marine managed area. And they wanted to have some substance as examples. And so we were fortunate to bring communities from West Papua to come and talk to them and exchange lessons learned. In that exchange, one of the things that resonated well with the Fijians was, as Selvi mentioned, the need to have clear decision-making pathway, as well as having a clear vision moving forward. And so at the end of the exchange that we had with West Papua, the chiefs of the province of Laos decided together that they needed to have a strategy. And so we started developing what we're calling the Laos Seascape Strategy, which is a document, a living document that we have now, and it's actually guiding all the partners that want to work in the Laos province to manage marine protected areas as well as do general development work within the province.
So it really made a difference to have people, other Indigenous people, to be able to share those experiences, that relevance together. So, Anthony, I'm going to ask you the next question, but before I do, I just wonder, as a Cook Islander, a Cook Island Maori, coming from another generation, what is your reflections on what you just heard?
Coming from another generation, oh, geez.
Our token young person, no.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one because with the next generation and even the generation after me, getting into these spaces where there's a gradual increase in local involvement is being recognized in the Pacific and even other coastal communities. There is one thing that I worry about. There is one thing that I worry about it, and that's with the development of technology. This is a good thing, actually. With the development of technology, we have these new generation people coming through, Indigenous people, and they have this infrastructure, these resources to promote Indigenous work in marine protected areas. And that's really cool. It's extremely powerful, and they have the capacity to push these things forward. But the thing that concerns me is that also with this advanced technology, they're getting distracted from the goal. They're getting distracted from the goal. And that's something that I worry about. But I'm hoping that with the next few generations, we can still create enough voices to try and intertwine and still lock into our Pacific leaders and see the value in working together across Pacific nations.
I really appreciate hearing that, as having, kids that are of my own that are interested in sciences, but also technology, just have that honest reflection about that. So you're getting your PhD in fisheries right now. You're clearly building both your scientific knowledge base and continuing your knowledge base as a Cook Island Maori. Just wondering, what are some of the challenges and what are some of the opportunities you see, and how are you seeing that apply in fisheries? That's what you're getting your PhD in, right?
Yeah. So I'm looking at Pacific Island coastal reef fisheries, doing a case study on my homeland, Mitiaro. And the interest there is looking at subsistence-based fisheries, the fisheries that people are not talking about in the scientific literature. In the design of this case study, the common theme in the Pacific was commercial fisheries. Very little to no scientific data around the subsistence and artisanal fisheries. And these are the fisheries that our people rely on. Okay, so these things are going undocumented. In other words, these places are data poor. So because they're data poor, it's very difficult when it comes to having informed decision-making situations. And the best that we have at the moment then is the local traditional knowledge. That is the best information that we have on hand today. But the challenge is getting more people, more scientists, and not just beyond science as well, going into these areas and starting to collect data so that we can start to generate a picture of what it looks like. Are our people safe? Are they going to be secure food-wise for the future? That is part of the challenges, trying to get access to being able to do that.
I know I said I wasn't going to ask you a question that I didn't already warn you about, but how did you pick that? Because, you went unconventional, right? You decided to go for the fisheries. What drove you to that?
Yeah, well, it was actually, I didn't know that I wanted to get into it until I got into it, really. I wanted to do something that I would think that I would fall in love with. And I wanted something that was potentially helpful for people and the environment. What serves the people? What serves the environment? So I thought, food security. Why not take this case study home to the people that I care about and that I love? And as a byproduct of all of that, perhaps I could inherit a bit more knowledge around Indigenous fisheries management. And it's an interesting one because being at the nexus between being a scientist in contemporary science and also in Indigenous, it's a bit of a messy thing, but perhaps I can go on that later. But when we talk about Indigenous knowledge, say Cook Island Māori fisheries management, something that I'm really interested in, people don't really understand that. What does that actually mean? Where does that actually come from? Where does this Indigenous knowledge come from? And I think many of us do understand that Indigenous knowledge is passed and generated over generations of observations in the marine environment and observing the ecology. Yeah, I can go into that deeper too, but maybe I'll save that for later. But basically, the way what's so amazing in these data poor areas is that when we look at the local way of doing things, these fishers base their resource management, their fisheries on things like the weather, wind and conditions and directions, the time of year, moon phases, and relating that to associated fish aggregations in the area. And basically what's so cool about that, the significance of that is, if we break it down, this information, this indigenous information, are like a natural, they're essentially a natural mobile fishing restriction. Some people might be like, what do you mean? What I mean is that if the weather is poor on the east side of the island, you will fish on the west. If the weather is poor out in the ocean, you will fish from the reef. If the weather is beautiful out in the ocean, you will fish from the ocean. If there is a spawning aggregation or fish aggregation coming in close to the island, they target these fish, relieving pressure from other fish. It is a natural, mobile fishing restriction. And it's these are the sort of fundamentals that sort of define traditional, well, in the Cook Island sense, traditional fisheries management.
That doesn't sound data poor at all. Just saying. Dr. Tibai, so you are training next generation people like Anthony. So tell us about that experience. How are you as a teacher really exploring some of these and bridging these so that people like Anthony can have these pathways that weren't afforded to most of us?
Yeah. I think it is a big challenge to me, but maybe to us, when the transfer knowledge is like traditional knowledge for the younger generation today. So when we talk about the traditional knowledge, about the customary role for the younger, they can think about it is the past story, not for me, but it is just for the censor. It's not for me. So it is. I think it is a very. It is one big challenge to me, to us, to transfer knowledge. The local knowledge is a traditional knowledge, customary rule for our younger today. So based on my responsibility like a lecturer in the University of Papua, we have two courses, the mainly course in Papua University. It's like about the student must knowing about the ethnography of Papua. It consists of how you are, and then it's tell about the biodiversity, tell about the distribution of language in Papua, distribution of tribe in Papua, and then how to people interaction with the resources in Papua. I teach one, of course, in my university. So for the practices, I give the exercise to my student, go to the field, and then talk about the indigenous knowledge, about the practices. It's a long time ago, they existing to now, and why they can be changed. So it is, and then second, I teach my student second course is about the sociology coastal community. Sociology coastal community talk about how to people in coastal area, in marine and small area, is like Papua people to interesting and to utilizing their resources in the coastal. And then how to knowing about the characterize the socio-economic and culture is like important things for younger generation today. So many young generation didn't know about who you are. Yeah, so it is very important to teach my student and at Papua University, but its mainly course consists of other course in Papua University. Is the second, and then it is the first, and the second is with my colleagues in Papua University, we can make one modules. It consists of the local contents about the practices indigenous people to interact in their resources in the Papua. In these years, the modules can be implementing in one of the marine conservation area in the Burhas Escape. It's a Kaimana region. So the module purpose just to support the elementary student to knowing about their environmental. Yeah. It's like about where is your resources, and now where you come from, where your culture is about it. So this year's the module can be established in the one area conservation in West Papua. It is second, and the third, with my friend in our university, we facilitate the government, local government, to do finishing local regulation to protect the customary area in the marine area. So customary people must have enough space to their live and enough space to their action with the resources. I think, it is the third ways to support that challenge from Anthony, to support the challenge for young generation today, to change the mindset, to change the thinking of the indigenous knowledge is important, but not. It is a past story, but today is the story for us.
These are really examples about the cycles, right, and the timing and where all of our different peoples are in terms of kind of coming out of these realizations and the impacts from change and colonization and all of this, and everybody's in a different place, and they're multifaceted, right? In some places we have young people ready, hungry. In other places we have to remind and really rebuild this hunger and this understanding of this importance so it doesn't go away. Thank you for that. We're going to switch it up a little bit. So Susanna, I'd love to change topics and ask you, really about gender and about what you've seen in terms of gender roles in conservation. How are the roles of women changing, and how do you do that? How does the change happen with continuing to respect culture, right? There are gender norms in all of our cultures. So how do we do that? And I mean, you've broken the mold in many, many ways. You are a scientist and you were raised in one of the most traditional sets of islands in Fiji. So talk to us about gender.
Gender is, in our countries, in the traditional context, there are gender stereotypes that are accepted. Men have specific roles and responsibilities that are only given to men. Likewise, with women, there are certain roles that women are supposed to do, and there are certain things that they are not supposed to do.
Right.
And because our culture has integrated itself so much into Christianity and religion, many of the roles are also associated with what we perceive to be given by God, as God, has ordained men and women to do. So in that context of the defined roles that we each play in our communities, we find that working in conservation and bringing in conservation ideas are often very difficult if the society or the community is very traditional. And so one of the key things that we try to assess first and foremost is how traditional is that particular community that you're entering for the first time? Are they really leftist traditionalists, or are they kind of in the middle where they could accept the new norms that are coming in? And so in societies where they're very traditionalist, we're very careful not to offend, and we're very careful to organize the meetings in such a way that it's a win-win situation, that the chiefs feel respected while at the same time we're able to hear the voices of the women. And we try to do it in a very transparent manner so that the chiefs understand that we need to listen to the women as well, and that the women have something to say, and perhaps they're not telling those things to the chiefs, but we'd like to hear them. And upon the chiefs' agreement, then only then we would take the women aside and talk to them. But as time goes by, I've seen a lot of changes with a lot of the push for human rights and rights-based approach, and of course the idea of bringing equity-based conservation, equity-based governance. And all these ideas have also shifted the expectations in local communities, such that in some cases the communities themselves have set up their own little committees. So they have a specific committee, subcommittee from the village meeting that looks after development, a subcommittee that looks after education. And so all these subcommittees are set up, and women are able to be part of those subcommittees where they have a space to talk, they have a space to discuss their issues, and of course also make recommendations on things that they think should happen. But we often find that although there are committees in place in such communities, when they come to the collective, the tradition comes to play. And so the women know automatically that they're not supposed to be talking if their uncles are sitting in the room or if their brothers are sitting in the room. So these are, subtle things that happen in the Pacific community, I'm sure, at large, and that this is something that we all respect and we take for granted that it happens. And as a community worker and as a development conservationist, I guess we'll just have to be very sensitive about these issues, and that we must always understand that although women may not be speaking out in the collective, they do have their ways to speak. We've had experiences where the whole community have agreed to go out on a certain day to do planting. However, when we turned up to actually do the planting on that day, it was cancelled. And we asked, why was the cancellation? And it so happened that there is a women's church happening, a service happening on that day. But of course the men didn't know about the service for the women, but because the women take precedence, their voices were heard, and so the event was cancelled because of the women's circuit church that had to happen on that particular day. In terms of fisheries, in Fiji in particular, there has been one recent study by Dr. Manubai and her colleagues that showed that in small-scale fisheries, women are actively involved. However, these are not documented and they are not recorded. And they found in their study that for all the catch that the women brought in, 70% was taken and eaten in the house. And so it contributed to the food supply, of course, and the nutritional value to the communities. It also, 30% was sold to the market, and so it improved the earning power of the women and also improved their economic status. And so working with women in traditional society is very interesting. And we've also found that another way to go around the tight traditional expectations is to encourage women to have their own associations or women's group. And we found that with the women themselves working in groups, they thrive in a collaborative environment. And I'd like to just close with sort of a proverbial saying in Fiji. It says, "Vuandua meaning that you go alone as an individual. Vua taurua means that you're either here or there, but you're very unreliable and you're not committed to anything. And then vua veisalai is where everyone are committed to carry the same burden, have the same vision, and share the burden of moving forward to the vision that they have agreed to do.
Vinaka. Susanna, there was so much there, so much richness, and it really just speaks to how complicated these issues around gender are and how important it is in doing work in quote-unquote conservation, how important it is to understand the local conditions, and that those vary from village to village, from shoreline to shoreline, from culture to culture. And it's really important to understand those nuances and not kind of get into a pattern of checkboxing, and also making sure that we're not bringing what might be from my culture and my expectation onto what might happen in West Papua and into the Cook Islands. These are complicated, issues, and it really requires what, Susanna, you're talking about, finding mechanisms and pathways to bring everybody in so everybody sticks to that. Thank you so much for that. We could do a whole panel, clearly, on just the topic of gender and what Susanna just said. But on this, so Representative Babalta, Rep Sheila, as you allow me to call you, what are your thoughts on gender, and where do you see policy and the ability to kind of drive policy around these issues? What's happening in your part of the world?
Thank you, Aulani. In my community, we have really adopted the Western way of decision-making and representation. But the women continue to lead the difficult conversations that we have back home. Conversations around militarization, climate change, colonialism, reviving our culture, and they understand. The pieces that I wear today are all gifts from women, because when we have these conversations, they're hard, and they're complex, and they're painful. And so by wearing these pieces, I feel like they're here with me and guide me through our conversation. I see how in my community the women have formed almost a parallel power structure in the nonprofit arena, where women, Indigenous women, are leading conversations around those major issues, and they're able to organize our community, they're able to influence policy, and gather and engage with our community. And so although the Western style of decision-making and representation is prevalent where I'm from, our women continue to find creative ways to make our way into those spaces. And so I see many opportunities for us to make space for these voices and make space for women, because we understand. We work very closely in the home with the children. We are very close to nature, and we have knowledge, valuable knowledge, to bring to the table and contribute to decision-making. And so we can discuss and engage, but at the end of the day, who is voting on the decision? We need the women at the table to vote and to make those decisions, because burnout is real. And that is something that is being studied now. Women have so many responsibilities, and there are so many expectations. And then we have these large, complex issues that we as women feel so responsible to take on and tackle. So there's lots of opportunity for us to make room, make space, fund these positions so that we can have that female voice, that woman at the seat, making a table and voting on proper policy that really takes the community into consideration, and it really does contribute to the prosperity of her people. Yeah.
Woo. Make space.
Make space.
Amen. I think I'm the only one here on the panel who come from a community where we're the minority. So sometimes in places where Indigenous people are the lawmakers and are the policy and work in government, there's sometimes, you have indigenous people working in systems, but it's not necessarily indigenous knowledge and engagement and traditional ways of knowing and doing that are brought forward. It's the challenge, right? These systems, these Western systems that are part of our societies now. So I'm curious, as a modern kind of Western lawmaker, how have you seen indigenous ways of knowing, this knowledge base, actually shape and change maybe a direction that has happened in your home?
Thank you, Alani. In the Mariana Islands, we have a very unique relationship with the United States. The island of Guam is a U.S. territory and has her own relationship with the U.S., while the remaining islands of the Northern Mariana Islands form a commonwealth, and we are in political union with the United States. So although we have different political statuses with the U.S., we make up the same archipelago, we are part of the same chain, and we make up the Mariana Islands. Several years ago, 2015, there was an announcement that troops were being moved from Okinawa to Guam. And that movement, although that movement was happening to our sister island, it greatly impacted the entire archipelago, our entire chain. And so this announcement was made, and proposed plans were shared with the community that were very destructive to our ocean, our marine mammals, our land, our sacred land, and our airs, our skies. And my community was outraged. So they organized, and they had to organize the Western way, which was very stressful. It took a lot of energy, it took a lot of time, but the women led the way and were able to collect over 30,000 public comments to oppose these plans. And fast forward to 2 weeks ago, we got news from the Department of Defense that major items were taken off the table in these plans. And although that is good news, that's a good step forward, we have yet to still see the entirety of the plan and see the larger picture, because we also don't support moving destructive activities, training, and testing to other parts of the world. And so, you know, this kind of engagement where an announcement is made and then the community is almost forced to engage in that way is so much for a community to handle, especially a community like mine, where we are recovering from 2 super typhoons. We have a pandemic. We have a lot of political turmoil. And so I really would like to offer a different approach to engaging with traditional communities and with indigenous populations. Instead of making announcements, come to the table, sit down, preferably outside near the ocean. That's where we make our best decisions.
Yeah.
And listen. And listen to the indigenous community. Listen to their struggles, listen to their successes, listen with respect and compassion and curiosity. There's so much that we can learn from indigenous communities and indigenous leaders, and then as a leader, respond to their needs versus coming in and telling the community, this is what we're going to do, tell us if you like it or not. Mm-hmm. And so there are different ways to engage with the community, and I really encourage our leaders, our legislators, policymakers to reimagine engagement. And keep that in mind, keep the community in mind, because there's so much already happening. And in my community, many families are focused on stabilizing the home, let alone, thinking about militarization and climate change. We're just trying to feed our family. And so that's really important to keep in mind when you're engaging with indigenous communities.
Mahalo.
Great. Thanks for that.
Noah.
Noah, you're a bit of a legend. When I first started in conservation, we heard about what was happening here in Belao and restoration of traditions like the bull, and when you were a legislator, you know, really driving that change, right? And it really inspired. I mean, and I had a good friend in conservation who I learned early on and said, you know, some of the solutions to what we need here in Hawaii is actually going to come from Palau and from Micronesia and these incredible people. So you've had, if you reflect back, because I feel like I've been in conservation a while, if you reflect back, you've seen a lot of change, right? How indigenous community engagement, knowledge, tradition has shaped and has changed, and the world's getting more complex. Some just reflections. I don't want to guide you anywhere. I just want to ask you to share your thoughts as being someone who's been doing this for a while.
Well, Ailani, I'm really inspired from listening to the panel. It's just,
yes.
I feel good that the world is going to be better just because we have these. I'm so proud. I'm so proud. And, you know, as I said, I'm a trained hunter and a fisherman. That's all I know. But this is my place, and I want to see change. I want to see it for better. The future is better. And I really didn't know much about this. And I'm not, you are specialists, you have specialized on different things, but I'm not. I'm basically kind of trying to figure out how we move the voices and actions all the way to the top. And I say it took more than 40 years of my life. Today, we don't have 40 years. No, we have really limited time. And so the journey I went through started with really my knowledge and my connection with the elders and traditional leaders and fishermen. And we started from there, sharing exactly the kind of concerns they have, and bringing what I know to share with them and help them go through a thinking process of solutions. So yes, there's always issues, but I think what we did years back, more than 40 years, was let's start with our traditional system because we know that. We already know that. The science and the Western thing, they take a lot more than years to do, and by the time we go through that, maybe the fish will be no more. And so reminded me of a Palauan proverb that says, goes something like this: you search far and wide only to find what you need in your backyard. So that came to me, reminded me that, okay, I go all over the place, but the solution is right here. You can't expect to bring solution from outside. Yes, bring whatever is the science and others to augment what you have, but not to supplant that. And you got to keep that connection. And so, over the time, traditional leaders, they made their edict about what they want to do, and I knew that was not enough. So I had to work with the local governments, and so then we had the mirror legislation that will say, okay, local government will have laws that will mirror this traditional edict so that we can have enforcement, proper enforcement under the law. Even then, that was not enough. We had to go to the national government level to get support, money, policy, and all of that. And so, again, we went up all the way to, I changed my life to become a congressman with one agenda: to find money to support the community actions, because I knew they were right. I knew that what they did was really supporting the national policy on all of these commitments that they made, but government was not really coming up with money. And so I had to work hard, and I told myself I will go to Congress. I'll be part of the Ways and Means Committee so that I can appropriate money for the communities. Well, it was a big disillusionment. What I thought would be 4 years ended up being 12 years in Congress. And people who know me, my health went down, but in the end, we have a sustainable finance mechanism for the community. And so that's the, communities, as you know, they don't really need much. All they need is to be listened to. Listen and try to help with their thinking process, help them come up with solutions that's appropriate to their places. And then build on that, build the leadership, build support, bring them the new things that they can use. But most of all, I think they do need money. There's no way around it. You can have the best plan, but if there's no money, what's the use? It's going to be on the shelf. An imperfect plan with money will go a long way to making some incremental progress. So I'm happy with incremental progress, but it needs to continue to grow. And so that has been my life, and I'm so inspired by young people. Palau has quite a number of young people who are smart, but they do need support and guidance from elders and local communities. Were educated in the Western schools, and when they come back, they're smart, but they still need to go through the local education. And so we need to maintain the connection. Without that connection, we become just kind of part of people that just walk around. So kind of maintain that connection, because that is, I believe in that connection. I believe the islanders have kind of a sixth sense. You know that something is wrong. Even before some scientist says something is wrong, we already feel it. And that's because of the connection. And I thank you, Aulani. I think this is a great panel, and I really think that we have to continue the voice and get the voice into action to get results. And we don't have much time. That's my reflection. Thank you.
Thank you.
So proud of you.
Well, sadly, we're already running out of time, so I'm going to ask everyone to just indulge for a few more minutes if you're able. I want to ask each of the panelists in 30 seconds or less, what do you want to leave with the group? Any order? Or do I have to call on you?
That's the Pacific way. Call on us.
Okay. Rep Sheila.
If I could leave you with one thing today, I really want to reflect back on what President Obama told me when I asked him about militarization and the presence in the Pacific Islands. So in dealing with large institutions, right, raise awareness, gather allies, and unify voices. Unifying voices is really challenging. Raising awareness, gathering allies, that can be fun, and there are models to follow. But when it comes to unifying voices, it can be so challenging because of the different representation and the different decision-making styles that exist in many indigenous places around the world. And so I really want to leave you with that idea of approaching communities in the way that they are comfortable with, so that they can share with you openly and honestly their needs, and so that you can respond in a way that's effective and in a way that really positively contributes to the prosperity of their community. Thank you.
Anthony.
Well, I think I'm going to attack the indigenous knowledge versus contemporary science situation here. So it's a potential pot stirrer, but what's a conference without a little pot stirring? Basically, I think indigenous knowledge in the environmental space is taken too literally. It's over-romanticized. Okay, here comes the pot. It's over-romanticized. Our people didn't literally go hug trees and sing to the grass and kiss sharks or whatever. No. That is not the intrinsic relationship that our people have with the environment. It's a whole lot deeper than that. If we look at marine protected areas conservation, we'll look at contemporary methods of marine protected areas and indigenous conservation. the comparison isn't important in that they both achieve conservation. The comparison is that why are they established? Why are they there? Okay. When we look at marine protected areas in a contemporary science space, they look at the environment, and we can tell by scientific data that our resources require biodiversity and an ecological balance. Therefore, let's conserve this place. Let's conserve the well-being of this environment. In the indigenous space, here comes the pot again, it wasn't about the well-being of the fish, of the resources. Conservation in indigenous space is a byproduct of something much deeper. The drive that achieves that conservation is survival. Okay? Conservation is a byproduct of the need to survive. What do I mean by that? I mean that if I don't conserve these marine resources, I don't eat, my family doesn't eat, my village doesn't eat. We die. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a strong enough impetus, enough drive for me or our people to want to pay attention to these resources, this ecological environment. That is why conservation exists in the indigenous space. And this information is passed over generations, right? So if we look at across a generational spectrum, unimportant information does not pass down family lines. If it doesn't serve you, if it doesn't serve your family, you don't pass that information down. However, if it serves you and your family and your village because it provides sustenance and cultural security, you naturally will pass that down through the generations. You pass it down your family. Now, if we have many families across many generations, over time that information, it's going to be tested, refined, and accurate. This is indigenous people's intrinsic relationship with the environment. This is real stuff. This is why indigenous knowledge needs to be taken seriously in the Western contemporary space. No fairies, no unicorns, no magic. Well, I might describe it as magical because it's freaking incredible, that's why.
A little bit of magic.
We have this incredible information over generations of information passing down. The challenge is we need that indigenous knowledge, but we also need contemporary science. We need them to work together. No more verses. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That's what's called a Polynesian minute. Sylvie.
Yeah. I think one point, important point to listen today, indigenous people is a last guardians to save our ocean. Because of that, we must support the indigenous people, give them more access to do it something in their area, in their town, in their land. So I think now many program comes to the like West Papua and another place maybe. Is indigenous people is become to the object to the something program. So now indigenous people can become the last guardian to save our ocean. We must give them more capacity for indigenous people. It's like give the position, give the like active to actor to create the resources, to keep the resources, and then help to the community, and then educate for the community too. So one day point is like Papua is we have a patriarchy culture. Patriarchy culture is a gift. Women doesn't have a power. Women doesn't have to access to formal and informal program or activity. But today, women have a power. Women can join with the men together, working together to protect their resources. And now, in the past time, maybe patriarchy in West Papua is absolutely a fact. But today is a chance. So why it can be changed? Because women have more access in the program conservation. Maybe, Lani, you know, one area conservation in West Papua, we have one group for women. They control patrol teams. It comes from the women. So it is just, I think it's a very interesting to me because the women can get some same with the men today. So it is, yeah, I think it's a very important when they're involving the local community.
Don't make a mom or a grandma mad. Never a good idea. Thank you. Susanna.
For me, the gender stereotyping is something that we need to move away from and to enable spaces where women and other vulnerable members of the community could provide their thoughts about development opportunities that are there, as well as share aspirations and their hopes. And one thing that struck me in this conversation is the importance of traditional knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge. And I really thank Anton for describing the intricate details of how traditional ecological knowledge has been something that is collected over time, generation, intergenerational spaces, and passed on. And now that many young youth are becoming more inclined to ask questions, I grew up in a time where we are not allowed to be asking questions because traditional knowledge is a given. But with the youths of today, we encourage them to ask questions and ask relevant key research questions that can really unpack a lot of this traditional knowledge and bring out the magic so we can all understand.
Yes. Yeah. Noah, for our final word.
I say it's time to harness the knowledge of the traditional people, indigenous people, harness that and the passion that they have, add science to it, technology, and unleash a new wave of action for the Pacific to save our islands and our oceans.
Yo. We thank you for staying through the day and joining us in this session. We hope that you took something from this and it was helpful. I know we often get questions, how do we work with Indigenous people? A little bit of anxiety sometimes. So we hope that this conversation helps to demystify a little bit about that. It's really core principles of making space, of talking with us, of sharing problems and ideas, and just having conversations that can continue. And our goal was to be able to bring a conversation really worthy of your time, and one also that we wanted to participate in, something that would also engage us and help us to grow. And I think that's really the key, is being open and having these conversations, learning and growing. And so really thank you for your engagement. I know we're running over time, so we're going to bring this to a close by just saying closings are really important. We're very good at opening. We're good at ideas. We're good at new conversations. We're good at commitments. But are we good at actually bringing those to a close, either successfully or acknowledging we can't finish them and just allow for that, or even having some fail and learn from those and acknowledge that? We have to bring things to a close, and they're just as important as opening.
And so I've been given the privilege to join my friend and our MC for today to bring a small tradition from Hawaii to be a way to close today and as a closure for this session on the other side of Moiwe. And so, and Keobo, KB, is partly, we're going to claim him for Hawaii because he was partly raised in Hawaii, so we're going to do this together. And if all of you would like to join us, we offer the opportunity to do something just very small. So remember, we're all in a circle. And in Hawaii, we have multiple clapping styles, but one is an opoho style. So you clap, because this kind of a clap makes a different sound to this. And it represents the planet, the earth. It also represents the womb and regeneration. So I'm just going to say a few words that's really going to ask for safeguarding, to safeguard all of us to be able to flourish in all of the elements. In the heavens, on earth, in the ocean, and here in Belao, as a gratitude for all of the wonderful hosting. So I'm going to say a few words, I'm going to pause, I'll be a little dramatic, and that means you're going to clap once. And then I'm going to say a couple more words, and I'll be a little dramatic, and then we're going to clap twice. So if you'd like to join us, no pressure, but if you want, what I would like you to do is in this clap, hold an intention. Something that maybe you're inspired by today, something you heard that you're going to follow up on, some commitment that you're going to make, big or small, that's just going to help take the next step towards having these conversations and making space. So we thank you again for that. So, okay. Ma lama o ko ya ma ko. E ulu I ka lani, e ulu I ka honua, e ulu I ka moana nui a kea, e ulu I ka pai aina o Belao. Eli eli ko mai, a ma, ua noa. It is lifted, it is free.
Thank you so much.
We're free.
Thank you, everyone, and that brings us to a close. I don't want to say that we saved the best for last, but it seems like we did, and I'm not just saying that because Noah's my boss, but yes, please enjoy your evening, and we'll see you bright and early tomorrow. Thank you.